Good morning, everybody. How are you all? Good. I'm Mark Tapscott. I am the editorial page editor of the Washington Examiner, which I encourage you to become familiar with at dcexaminer.com. That's dcexaminer.com. We are committed to real journalism, which is to say, reporting the facts without fear or favor. And it just so happens that so often the facts favor people like us. And that's not coincidental, and that's part of why I'm here today. I want to thank Paul Jacobs for the invitation to be here, and I want to say publicly that in spite of the fact that he's from Arkansas, Paul Jacobs is one of the people in American politics that I admire the most. He is a man of conviction, he stands by his convictions, and he walks his convictions. I look out in an audience like this and I see Patrick McGuigan. If you all don't know Patrick McGuigan, let me tell you, you need to know him because he is one of the best journalists in America. You are. And my friend Brandon Dutcher is here. Brandon comes to Washington and he and I look at each other and we say, how can this place be so screwed up? Paul asked me to talk a little bit about the national perspective on initiative and referendums. And in one sense, there is no national perspective on initiatives and referendums because we don't have a national initiative or referendum process. Or at least that's the conventional wisdom. I became interested in political matters in 1964, sitting in my parents' living room in Moore, Oklahoma, watching TV in October. And this guy came on the television screen who I'd heard about, but I didn't really know anything about him. And he started speaking, and his name was Ronald Reagan. And by the time his speech was over that night, I was waving American flags and went out and organized a Teenage Republican Club and basically devoted the rest of my professional life to pursuing the kind of principles and the kind of America that Ronald Reagan embodied in his own activities. I came in on the conservative side, and I have to tell you, there's still a lot of suspicion, if you will, among educated conservatives about the INR process. And there is a historical reason for that. Our founders, of course, were very familiar with ancient history, with the problems of direct democracy in places like Athens. And one of the things that they built into our system, thankfully, were checks and balances, separation of powers. All these measures within the structure designed to slow down the process so that people, frankly, would have a little bit of time to think about this. Is this really what you want to do? And I think that's a very healthy aspect of our system. But they were not opposed to an initiative system. And I think the evidence for that is seen in the First Amendment, which guarantees the right to petition for the redress of grievances. And that is exactly what INR is all about, is petitioning the government for the redress of grievances. Fundamentally, that's what it's all about. I think one of the reasons the founders didn't become more explicit about providing this system with INR is because, at the time, if you go back and you look at the percentage of freshman members of Congress after each congressional election every 2 years, and I've done this, I know this, before the Civil War, it averaged about 70%. That's because people had other things to do with their lives back then besides being on the public till, being politicians. So there was this continuous infusion of new ideas, new thinking, new citizens who weren't dependent upon their political standing for their livelihood. That changed after the New Deal, when the federal government, frankly, became the dominant factor in most areas of American life, when Leviathan became the dominant factor, if you will. That changed the whole correlation, if you will, between the capacity of people to petition and obtain redress of grievances and the ability of incumbent political officials to prevent that process from happening. And that's why today, as a conservative, I've come to the conclusion that the initiative in the referendum, since we're not going to have term limits apparently, is our best hope today for achieving genuine limits on the ability of the government to tell you and I how to live our daily lives. Ronald Reagan said in his first inaugural address, if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who is capable of governing all of us? To me, that says it all. If Paul Jacobs is not capable of governing Paul Jacobs, how can he be capable of governing me? I can guarantee you he doesn't want me governing him. That's what it's all about, preserving the ability of people to petition and obtain a redress of grievances. I want to suggest one thing that perhaps has not been given the kind of consideration that it certainly will deserve in the very near future. And that's the role of the internet for the INR process. I've been very involved in the last 4 or 5 years in trying to make the federal government more transparent, because with transparency comes accountability. One of the things that we've accomplished, one of the few accomplishments, quite frankly, of President Bush in this area, was passage in 2006 of the Federal Financial Accountability and Transparency Act. If you're not familiar with that, it's commonly known as Covert Obama. It's the one good thing that Obama did. It puts most federal spending on the internet, and it puts you within a few mouse clicks in a Google-like database of knowing what they're doing with your money up there in Washington. I believe that is going to become, as more and more people become familiar with the fact that it's there and begin to use it, the INR petition, this process, is going to become even more important, because people are going to become more and more concerned about what's happening with their money. We don't have that process on the state level. I think we need to be thinking about, is it possible with the internet at some point to have a national referendum process? I have to tell you, I don't know that the answer to that question is yes or no. And frankly, I'm a little suspicious of it, a little uncomfortable with the idea myself. But then conservatives are always a little suspicious or a little uncomfortable with change, you know. But I think we're going to have to think about it, because quite frankly, we live in a world now that is digital. Our kids, our children, they've grown up digital. They're the first generation that has done that. They Twitter. How many of you all Twitter?
I don't even know what it is.
I was in a meeting. I was in a meeting Thursday in Washington. Actually, you all do Twitter all the time. Every time you hear somebody from Washington say something, you're twittering with laughter. I was at a meeting of a bunch of conservative leaders Thursday talking about what do we do now that the election has come out the way it did. And I asked them, how many of you guys Twitter? Not one of them. Not a single one of them. We've got to learn the digital age, or we won't have any influence in the future. Because communication and influence is going to be based on your ability. It's already to a great extent based on your ability to communicate, to motivate, to organize, and direct through the internet. So I hope that we'll give that some discussion today. I'm going to wrap up my proceeding, and I'm very happy and very glad to be here. We'll answer any questions that any of you have. I must say that in 2 weeks, sir, you're going to come to Stillwater, and we're going to have a game for you. Thank you.